Let's talk a little bit about history. George Santayana once wrote, "Those who fail to learn the lessons of history are condemned to repeating mistakes of the past." 1965. Geotechnical engineers are so risk-prone, they're being sued so much, for so much, they have become uninsurable. In fact, they are unable to obtain professional liability insurance from anyone, anywhere in the world. That's how bad things were. They banded together, and in 1969, they created an organization called Associated Soil and Foundation Engineers, today known as ASFE, Inc. Its membership is not at all limited to geotechnical engineers anymore, and although they're very much involved, environmental engineers, many civil engineers, construction materials engineering and testing organizations, a variety of engineering firms belong, and all have benefited tremendously. When the organization was formed, the CEOs of the 10 firms involved had a burning question. Why are we being sued so much? We're really good at what we do. So the first thing that ASFE's leaders did was conduct research. And much to their surprise, they discovered they weren't very good at what they did. Their assumption was that first and foremost, they were geotechnical engineers. That was their mistake. Because in fact, first and foremost, they were the leaders of business entities, business organizations. And in order for them to prosper through professionalism, they had to conduct their organizations well. They had to be effective business people. They therefore had to learn what you are going to have to learn as you gain more responsibility next year, the year after that, and the years to come. You need to become adept at much more than whatever particular technical discipline you've learned, you've studied, and you've apprenticed for in these past few years, or maybe in some cases in these past many years. Let's take a look at the many roles that you play now or will be called upon to play in the years immediately ahead. Let's start with being a reporter. It's one of the fundamental things that you do. And you're going to be saying to yourself, reporter, what kind of reporting do I have to do? Oh, all sorts of reporting. Think about it. Think how much information is transmitted from one person to another orally through conversation. And you think, oh, I'll remember this, and you know that you won't. So you have to get into the habit of taking good notes. This is being a reporter. You have to be able to answer the questions: who, what, where, when, how, and why. These are important questions, and if you are going to be an effective reporter, you are going to put them down. And the more you get into the habit of being an effective reporter, the better kinds of questions you're going to ask. And you will get down the information you have. So that when people, for example, call you from the field and say, gee, I have a question here, how do I do thus and so, you will know the kinds of questions to ask in order to elicit the information you need in order to give a good answer. And that is what is known as being a good reporter. It is amazing the number of problems that emerge because of information we communicate orally and we think we're going to remember, and we're not going to remember it. What aren't we going to remember? That's right. We're not going to remember oral communication. You also need to be a good writer. Why is that? Well, for among other reasons, because you're a professional. Professionals should be masters of the language they speak. Certainly. I mean, how would you like to look at some professional dissertation and whoever wrote it can't match a plural subject with a plural verb? You have to be a good writer when you're writing notes, when somebody has a question that's emailed in and you're going to text it back. You want to make sure that it's written properly. When you write a proposal, you want to write it well. You will be represented by what you write when you are not present yourself. What you have written is very powerful, and if you want to create a professional image for yourself, you must be an effective writer. And if you keep it simple and you write simply, you will have control over what you write. That's a good thing. That's the mark of a good writer. You also need to be a good editor so that you can edit your own material well and edit material prepared by others. Bear in mind that what you write tends to last forever, especially when it's transmitted electronically in whatever form. What you write is what will represent you years from now. And you can say, well, I'm an effective writer, but you must also be an effective editor, because what you write at the time may seem right, but when you go through with the mindset of an editor, be it your stuff or somebody else's, it'll look different. You'll want to go in and take out all those ambiguities. For example, I just signed a check with my new pen and now I can't find it. Now, at the time you wrote that, you knew exactly what you had just misplaced. Would you know 5 years from now? Would you know that in order to be an effective editor, what you should have said was, I just signed a check with my new pen and now I can't find my new pen. That's how you get rid of ambiguity. It may not be the most elegant writing in the world, but again, you're not writing for the New York Times bestseller list. You're writing to be clear, unambiguous. That's important when it comes to editing. Proofreading is vitally important. Proofreading is quality control of what you've written. Many people believe, mistakenly, as they probably did in 1965, that to be a good proofreader, I am going to read it very slowly and carefully. And that way I can make the same mistake over and over again, but very slowly and carefully. Proofreading is an art. There are certain things that you do, and we're probably going to have a separate program just on proofreading. Suffice it to say that if you are not a good proofreader and you allow just an itty-bitty little mistake to sneak through, what can happen is that you will use the wrong word. Maybe you'll say compliment with an I instead of an E, and as a consequence, completely change the meaning of a sentence. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll accidentally leave in a comma that should be taken out. You see this headline? That's for real. A misplaced comma, a comma that shouldn't have been where it was, cost a contractor $13 million. And that's the truth. That's the importance of effective proofreading. Let me tell you how important leadership skills are. I'm sure you've probably heard of it and said, oh, yes, well, I'm a leader. Let me tell you, first and foremost, you cannot be a leader if you don't have followers. And you're not going to have any followers unless people believe in you. It requires you to be a really solid professional, somebody who does his or her best to do it right and who is unafraid to admit that, you know what, maybe I made a mistake and maybe I could have done it better. It is somebody who gives praise to others, somebody who makes others feel good to be around them. That's what it is to be a leader. When you assemble a project team, you are the leader. You can say, well, I'm a project manager, but understand this. Managers manage things. Leaders lead people. Leadership skills are extremely important. You need to develop them. This is not to say that, gee whiz, management is not important. No, it's also important to be an effective manager, to set up schedules, to help ensure these schedules are met, to help ensure that whatever it is supposed to be out the door at a certain time, in fact, is out the door at a certain time because the various tasks that had to be done are coordinated and are effectively managed. Yes, management is important. Management is, to a very real extent, the heart and soul of any organization. And remember this about management. If you can't first and foremost manage yourself, you will never manage anything else. Manage yourself first, managing other things then becomes much simpler. You also need to be an effective supervisor. You have to be able to oversee what other people are doing. Are they doing it properly? Are they getting it done when they should? Is the management plan being fulfilled by the people in whom you've invested the responsibility? It is your role as a supervisor to help ensure these things get done. That's what an effective supervisor does. All too often, I think people are told, okay, you're a supervisor now, and they're not given any specific instruction. It's up to you, if you're not given that instruction, to say, hello, can I have that instruction, please, so that I can do a better job for the people I'm supervising, for the organization I'm working for, and ultimately for myself. I want to feel good about my capabilities and getting things done. One of the things that comes with being a supervisor is being the human resources manager. And you're going to say, wait a minute, I'm not in charge of HR. No, but the people that you supervise will think you are, and they're going to ask you questions. Tell me about vacation. Tell me about the sick leave policy. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. And you really do need to understand these things. Naturally, you need to couch your answers in terms of, well, I think that, and gee whiz, it used to be, and check with so-and-so. Nonetheless, you are going to be expected to understand a lot of these issues and work within them to help out the people you supervise, because you're the person they are going to trust most. In that regard also, one of the most feared and hated jobs in any technical organization is the role of performance reviewer. It comes with being supervisor, though, and that is that you have to meet with the people you supervise and essentially evaluate them in terms of what they're doing and how well they're doing it. You're doing this well, this needs improvement, and so forth. It's very difficult to talk about these gut issues for a lot of technical people, but you have to get yourself able to do it with the mindset of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because essentially what you want to be able to do is give them honest appraisals, and where they need help, where they need to improve, let them know they need to improve so that they can do a better job for the organization, for clients, and of course for themselves, in addition to you. Ultimately, being an effective performance reviewer is one of the most important roles you play within an organization if you intend to help the people who look up to you. Historically, in professional organizations, younger people have learned from the senior people within the organization. It is the role of the mentor and the protege. Please do not call a protege a mentee. A mentee is some sort of a mint. I don't know what it is, but it is not a protege. We don't go into a dime store and say, hey, give me a pack of proteges, okay? We ask for some mentees. So what we're going to talk about is mentors and proteges. And it is a matter of taking your time and talking about some of the fundamental things. Now, it may be general or it may be specific within certain issues, but it is vitally important to be an effective mentor to those who look up to you, and as a protege, to find a mentor, somebody who can continue to provide guidance to you as your career progresses. In many cases, until your career plateaus at the highest level it is going to achieve, still you will benefit from having mentors. Let's talk about another important role, different from mentor and protege. Salesperson. I know you did not engage in a technical discipline in order to become a salesperson, and the thought of being a salesperson is probably awful. Oh, I don't want to be a salesperson. Get over it. Look, you are a salesperson already. You have a job. How did you get that job? You sold yourself. And in professional sales, what you're doing for the most part is simply selling yourself. You're saying, look, Here I am. I think I'm pretty good at what I do. Here's what I do. Here's what I can do for you. And you do it on a repeated basis. It's not that big a deal. All that you have to do for the most part is be yourself. That's what being an effective salesperson is. And ultimately, people trust you and they give you repeat business, they give you referrals, and they give you new business. And that's what you really are looking for in terms of what we call relational sales. You also want to be an effective marketer. Now, being a marketer and being a salesperson are different things. Being a marketer can mean, okay, we're going to put together this proposal and we're going to hit some of the high points. Being a marketer means you have to understand your market. That's going to be the market in which your clients are engaged. And you're going to have to understand your clients. You're going to have to do research because you want to be able to understand what is important to your clients. If you can understand what is important to your clients, you can offer your services or the types of services that are of most importance and most concern to your clients. That's what being an effective marketer is all about. One of the elements of being an effective marketer is being an effective public speaker. A lot of you again are going, ooh, public speaking, I'm so afraid of public speaking. You know what? If you become a better writer, a better editor, then public speaking is not nearly as scary because you know you have command of the language. You can keep your language simple, you can keep your language direct. You will have to make presentations from time to time, and you're going to do that. Public speaking. You are going to make presentations to public bodies who are looking for answers to their questions about work that you've been engaged to provide. You are going to be a public speaker in the sense that you are going to get up in front of people in your own organization and make a presentation, be it about a case history or some new research or project that you've developed. This is public speaking, but it's something you need to master. Public speaking that you do at meetings that you run will be accepted much more gratefully if you run the meeting well. This means that you're going to learn meeting management skills. It's not very difficult. Any number of articles have been written about it. There's material available from various organizations, putting together an agenda ahead of time, starting the meeting on time, ending the meeting on time. Any number of specific techniques can be applied to make a meeting productive, even different types of meetings. Do you know that there are types of meetings that you can conduct while walking from one place to another? These are effective meeting management skills. You can master them and as a consequence, run meetings effectively. The same thing can be said about being an interviewer. Oh, what do I need to be an interviewer for? Well, you're going to be interviewing people who are looking for a job at your organization. You are going to be interviewing people who you're thinking of putting on a team for a project you're going to lead. You are going to be interviewing client representatives to find out what their needs and expectations are. Interviewing skills are important. Don't think you know how to interview because you can ask questions. Where do you interview people? How do you interview people? What kinds of questions do you ask under different circumstances to different types of people? Interviewing skills are extremely important to master. Let's talk now about being an effective liaison. Isn't that wonderful? A little bit of French thrown in. Freebie. You can start off by being an effective liaison with contractors. In other words, what you do is you're going to be representing your firm with contractors. Now, some of them are going to be subcontractors, some of them will be general contractors, but they're going to be contractors. Why do you need to have effective relationships with contractors? Well, because you work with them all the time. You want to be able to recommend to your clients and others effective contractors to work with because it's going to make life a lot simpler to work with contractors you know and trust. And besides, they're in a position to give you a lot of good business too. So being an effective contractor liaison is important. In a similar fashion, it's good business to have an effective liaison with colleagues. And these are going to be individuals in your discipline and related discipline, individuals with whom you work frequently. These will be people who will be willing and able to answer questions you pose under the assumption that you are going to return the favor when called upon. When a client or prospective client you haven't worked with before asks you to provide services, and you say to that individual, the representative of the organization, "Excuse me, how did you get my name?" "Oh, I got it from so-and-so." "Why aren't you working with them now?" "Well," and this gives you the ability. You need to find out with whom you're working. Your colleagues are going to give you that information. Being a client liaison also is extremely important. And what this means basically is establishing relationships with the representatives of those clients, getting to know what's on their minds. How can you help them improve themselves at work? Well, find out about their personal lives too, establishing relationships with them so that they like working with you, and that way they will continually be a source of new business for you, a source that you can rely on, and in many cases, you develop personal relationships that can be very rewarding over your career. Also, during your career, you'll have relationships with government representatives, not just because some of them are going to be client representatives, but also because they're in charge of the regulations that you have to work with. They're the ones who issue the permits, who have to approve what you submit. You want to be able to understand where they're coming from to make their jobs easier and thereby help yourself and help your clients. Many of the regulations that you work with are not cut and dried. Many of them will depend upon circumstances unique to a given situation, even unique to a given site. Therefore, you need to understand those regulations so that when you go in and talk to the government representative, you know what you're talking about. Being a regulatory specialist can be a very, very difficult role to achieve, but an extremely valuable one. In dealing with these government representatives, one of the things you often have to do is negotiate. Therefore, you need to be a negotiator. But that's a skill that goes far beyond working with government people. It's working with clients. When it comes time, for example, to talk about contract formation, well, you're going to have to be an effective negotiator with respect to the risks that you have to bear, what the scope is going to be, and what elements of the general conditions you're willing to work with. Negotiation is also part of working with your supervisors and working with the people that you supervise. Negotiation is an extremely important skill, and it's, again, a skill you need to learn. It's one that, guess what? You can even use it at home. But don't tell my wife. Okay? Being a mediator is also important. This is somebody who can be in the middle of a situation and bring both sides together without them coming to blows. What is right about your position? What is right about your position? What are the give and take and so forth? Being a mediator can make things move forward very effectively, much better than they otherwise could, because we're all people and we tend to sometimes get embroiled in things. A mediator can be very worthwhile. Naturally, being a mediator, you have to phrase things well, and now we get into how you're going to have to be a diplomat too. Diplomatic skills are important, saying the right thing in the right way. In fact, diplomats have been described as people who can tell other people to go to hell, and they can't wait to pack their bags. When it comes to learning the lessons of history, we're talking about being a risk manager. Because first and foremost, as a risk manager, you want to be able to take a look at the project involved and figure out, based on what I know about what's happened on similar projects in the past, these are some of the risks that are likely to emerge. By understanding what the risks are likely to be, I can set in motion strategies to help manage those that actually occur. If during your career you can avoid one big dispute, even one small dispute in some cases, believe me, it will be worthwhile to have been an effective risk manager during your career. Being an insurance coordinator, in essence, is one of the elements of being a risk manager. Understanding, first and foremost, that insurance really is kind of a feeble safety net, and understanding what is and is not covered by various types of insurance, because that way you are going to have an impact in determining what kinds of risks you can and absolutely cannot accept. Because in some cases, you're going to wind up being your own insurance company, and that isn't necessarily going to be a comfortable position to be in. Lender? How can I be a lender? But guess what? You are a lender too. A banker, in essence. How can that be? Well, typically, it is going to be that you will accept an assignment, a commission, and you will say, we'll start work on it, and then you'll pay us. What you're doing is extending credit. And even if your firm has a policy that we have to have a retainer payment first, or even if that policy is we have to be paid in full first, doesn't matter. Because there are two kinds of credit you're extending. One of them is a direct financial credit in forms of the fee. The other one is what we can call risk credit. In other words, the residual risk that you must accept because you have been involved in a project. For example, if you're, let's say, a civil engineer or an architect who is involved somehow on a residential subdivision, you owe a duty of care to every single person who purchases a home or condominium unit or townhouse in that residential subdivision. And if the developer is a limited liability company that essentially dissolves once it's built, and if the contractor involved is part of the developer organization or is a separate limited liability company, guess whose liability is nearly lifelong when that project is done? Raise your hand, again, if you fall within that group. So it's very important to understand your role as a lender, and it's one of the reasons why you want to be very careful about the organizations and sometimes individuals to whom you extend that direct credit and especially that risk credit, that liability credit that is part and parcel of what it is you do. One of the other roles you sometimes have to play is bill collector. Ooh. You have to go to the site. The boss will tell you when you're out there, see the client representative and say, you know, you haven't paid us in 180 days. We could use a little infusion of do-re-mi. And that is not a particularly welcome task, but nonetheless, it has to be done. So it's important to stay on top of this. You don't want the bills to get too large. In fact, you should be paid in 30 days the same way that everybody else is supposed to be paid. I'll tell you something else that's been learned over the years on a very harsh basis. When it comes to having money owed to you, really, you don't want to use a lawyer or small claims court to collect, because that is an almost certain way to get sued for professional negligence. That's an important lesson that we've learned and that we'll talk about in another one of these programs. One of the things that was done in 1965, one of the things that's done today is you're going to be working with contracts. There are going to be written agreements because an oral agreement is one of the longest contracts you could ever enter into, because a judge can tell you what's written on any given page even though you've never seen it yourself. So you want the agreement in writing. And when you have that agreement in writing, you may make a change or two here or there. Any change that you make or any change that you accept directly makes you a lawyer. If you move so much as one comma, and we saw what can happen with a comma, you have become a lawyer. It's a legal document. Be sure you know what you're doing. Typically, what you really should be doing is relying on a real lawyer. But you can play one if you want. Understand, it can be very expensive. Being an accountant is another role you play, although not necessarily in running up the numbers in terms of always dollars and cents, but when it comes to actually managing a project, you're going to be told how many hours have been spent, how many hours are left. You're going to have to be able to look at various types of numbers and come up with a plan that often is going to be continually adjusted throughout the course of a project. You have to understand these. You have to be able to take time, projections, actualities, put them into dollars, compare that to what's being proposed, and so forth. It's not particularly easy, but again, it's all part and parcel of what you do. When you do learn to do these various things that you will be doing, when you learn how to do them well, then you'll be able to say, you know what? We are pretty good at what we do. And that's why we're not being sued.